Hey everyone, this is Ben Umstead.
And this is Martin Perkins.
So, we've got some really exciting news to share with you all. The audio book for Language of the Soul, A Path of Simplicity, is now available not only on all the major platforms like Audible, Spotify, Apple Books, it's also on Martin's website, martinperkins.com. So you can buy that directly from Martin and support him and support me as well, since I am narrating the audiobook. There's also some super cool stuff happening this summer. It's the 2024 summer series at Simplicity Farm, where Martin does the Language of the Soul courses.
On July 14th from 8:30 to 11 a.m., you can be in person or via Zoom. It's a free introduction to Tao Yin. A way of looking at what Tao Yin is, it's the foundational practice behind the healing and growth that most folks in seeking out language of the soul, they are seeking healing and growth in their lives in some way. It connects you to the ancient practice of deeply resting and deeply connecting to the soulful part of who you are in your life.
Another really great way of engaging with healing and growth is through the enjoyment of stories. And so we're going to do a movie club this summer. We're going to do 3 films. The first film is Arrival. You can watch that in person with Martin on July 21st. And then there's going to be a discussion on July 25th over Zoom. You can also watch the movie in your own time and join a discussion on the 25th. The second film is going to be Inside Out, the first film, not the sequel. You can watch that with Martin in person on August 4th. The discussion is going to happen on August 8th. The third and final film for this movie club this summer is Three Colors Blue, and that viewing will be on August 25th, with a discussion happening on August 29th.
Transitioning into the last event of the summer series at Simplicity, there's going to be on September 22nd from 8:30 to noon, a forest bathing experience. That day will begin with a meditation as well as an orientation to the spaces here at Simplicity, and then obviously the time in the forest, and we'll ultimately gather at the end in the healing center here at Simplicity.
If you'd like to sign up for any of these offerings, go to martinperkins.com. On any of the pages, you can scroll all the way down and you'll see a mailing list sign up. That's where you're going to get the newsletter. That's where you're going to get updates on these offerings and everything happening at Simplicity Farm. And now, on to the episode. Welcome back to Language of the Soul, conversations on healing and growth. I'm Ben Umstead.
And I'm Martin Perkins.
So, Martin, there's this great story that you relayed to me a few weeks back as we were contemplating what we wanted to do for the next newsletter and blog post. And it was a visit to the Social Security Administration. And for a lot of people, that space, the DMV can be included in this as well, can prove to be very draining places, a lot of tension, a lot of nervous energy that comes up in getting something renewed and getting something changed. It's a very busy place. There's a lot of activity, and often people frown upon even just the idea of going to it and it going well. You had an experience at the Social Security office that you ended up writing a wonderful newsletter, but we really felt like this was something that was so great to share with our listeners in the podcast. It starts off with something that's rather humorous, which is you had to go to change your name on your Social Security account on your card because when you were 16, getting ready to go in for your first official job, you put your nickname, your childhood nickname, Scooter. Nobody thought anything about it. Nobody blinked an eye at putting Scooter. So here you are going into the office. And for me, that was such a funny notion. What transpired there, though, what your experience was, is really the thing that catapulted sharing a story, being an observer in a space that can feel so unwelcome. And I think that speaks to what you observed, what you saw in regards to other people, feeling unwelcome, feeling like you have to be on the offense, feeling unwanted, even. And yet, something transpired, something transformative transpired.
Thanks for the intro, Ben. I appreciate the background to the situation. Being now in my early 60s and unfolding something or undoing something that was over 40 years ago in terms of a choice I made when I was 16 years old. And as I walked into the appointment at the Social Security Administration, I walk into this big room, 100 or more people. As you said, you can feel a sense of tension. A woman just ahead of me, and you could definitely feel her tension. She was moving around with some effort. She appeared to be in some degree of pain. She was checking at the kiosk, checking in. She became the centerpiece of my experience to some degree. And as I sat down, to wait for my turn, for my appointment, as is my practice, I become an observer to my world. I tend not to navigate with the experience with my phone or my device, and rather take in what's around me. And there's a toddler along the way with his grandmother. There's a young man watching YouTube videos. There's a woman who, having just completed her business with one of the clerks, stands before the group, the crowd of 100 or more people, and begins to declare very loudly her gratitude to Jesus. And it became a kind of call and response. She began to share biblical verses. She's being met with, you go, sister. The whole kind of sermon tone to the whole thing. It certainly captured the room for a short period. And as she moved along, the room offered her back shouts of encouragement and clapped for her. And we moved on. There was a brief settling, and then the woman who had just shortly before had arrived just ahead of me, she was called to her appointment. And like I shared, she was definitely carrying both physical and emotional tension. Gosh, only a short period into her sitting down with the clerk, and she began to shout. And her shouting got louder and louder to the point where now she's cursing. And there's just a lot of pain and frustration with her experience. She wasn't getting what she needed. Apparently, from what I could gather, she had not brought the needed documents in order to achieve her goal of apparently needing possibly a new Social Security card so that she could move into an apartment that she sought to get. And as she was shouting and cursing, and her voice is filling the entire room, much in the same way that the woman sharing earlier filled the room with her biblical call and response, the room responded very differently. Now there were shaking heads, and in general you could feel a kind of anger toward her tone, an anger toward her experience. I can't say whether or not it was toward her or toward the bureaucracy, but there was clearly a negation. I watched as the security guard very reluctantly worked his way around the room to intervene. And then the moment changed. And it changed in a very profound way. Because up stood a young woman who was sitting with her boyfriend. She walked over to the shouting woman, put her arm around her, and comforted her. And as she did so, the woman's voice began to quiver. And then shortly after, she began to cry. And over the next few minutes, this young woman held this healing space for someone who was obviously in very much a state of emotional and physical pain. You know, she wasn't going to get what she needed that day. As the woman stood up and she's comforted again by the younger person, the younger woman, who's now guiding her out, after a short distance, she said that she'd be okay. Shortly thereafter, I'm called to the same window, and as I sat down, it was evident that the clerk, who had just been the clerk for the woman shouting, she was shaken by the whole experience. And I asked if she was okay, and she nodded, yes, though my sense was that she really wasn't. She'd been shaken and it was going to take some time. In a somewhat humorous way, she pointed out that we both found it amusing actually, that the fact that anyone could sign up with any name for a Social Security card in the 1970s. She was appreciative of the fact that I walked in with the documents that I needed, which made her job straightforward, right? After I was done my business, 5-10 minutes, sent on my way, and I immediately got up from my work with the clerk and I walked over to the young woman who had soothed the woman in pain, and we talked. I shared just how beautiful it was to witness what she had done, and her face lit up. When I described her actions as beautiful, she just lit up. She was grateful that I had noticed her, what had occurred. As I walked out, I had this feeling, it's this being now we're in spring and, it's a time of regeneration, but it's also a time of, it's a time within the Christian perspective of Easter, of redemption, of resurrection, that anything is possible. I had this sense that the spirit of Yeshua ben Joseph and or Jesus had shown up in the room, and that oddly enough, I may have been the only one who had noticed. And this felt, it felt okay, though to some degree I had to grieve the notion that what I suspect a lot of people might have carried out of that experience was the woman who had preached, and not necessarily the woman who had comforted.
There was that sense of that smile when you acknowledged the young woman's act as being beautiful. I feel that smile is that acknowledgement that she knew too. When we talk about call and response in a more traditional religious sense, we often do think of what the other woman did in regards to sermon. And we often don't think of that call and response in terms of what the young woman chose to do, which in many respects, if you look at core aspects of theology, that ends up being that very potent call and response. An individual to an individual, sure, but that spirit that we speak of that flows between them, that's flowing between everyone in that room, regardless if they notice or not. They felt it. It's the woman who is shouting. There's something so extraordinary, as you talked about, that shift for her from just sheer frustration and anger and fear to letting go into those tears to release and not necessarily rationalize why they're doing it, compartmentalize all of the reasons behind it.
So powerful for her to be seen in that moment in a deeply caring way, and probably much more in the way that she really was crying out for. Sure, she was there for a bureaucratic remedy, but I think she might have walked out with something far more potent, which was someone holding her in the way that she desperately needed. And the notion of that call and response, that, yeah, recognizing she was seen, she was heard, someone was holding a space for her pain. And in our very rapidly moving world, there's just often this gets lost, right? People holding other people. And we don't have to know them. And like you pointed out, the call and response was at a whole different level when she held that woman in pain in a way that was just stunning. It's a moment that I cherish because, to me, it holds that possibility for all of us. That sense of we all can step up in our own ways. You know, I had no sense that that was my moment to step up. Frankly, as an older white man going up to comfort a woman of color, right? I don't know, no matter how delicately I handled that. I asked that question fairly early in the process. The message I received in turn was the potential for it to go very badly and it to be the opposite of what I intended really kept me in the observer role. And that's often I would suggest the question to be asked is, because there's a lot of people who want to help. The question is this my moment? And it was clear to me that my moment, my relationship to that moment was as the observer. But I'm sure there were other people in the room who also were feeling the pain of the moment, weren't just looking at the lady shouting and cursing and feeling like, you know, will somebody shut her up, right? And rather, her pain was tangible. How do we hold a space for that kind of pain? And I'm really grateful that this extraordinary young woman stepped up, answered the call.
We're sharing this experience. It's turned into a wonderful teaching story about answering the call, and to remember to have that space within us to still have some compassion and love towards this woman that you had encountered weeks ago now.
Right. My sense is that, sure, we can wonder about what happened next. And I'll be really honest, I don't spend much time on the what happened next part of it. I sincerely hope that there's healing and growth on the horizon for everyone concerned. But in terms of what happened next, I kind of allow these kinds of moments to be what they are in those points of presence and build upon the notion of like, what does that really mean moving forward? Well, for the younger woman offering comfort, I would suggest there'll be more moments of comfort for her. For the woman who was in so much pain, if she received that comfort, maybe she carries around a little less pain, or maybe a lot less pain. I hold that possibility for her without any attachment to like what that might mean.
If you'd like to read more or check in on what's going on at Simplicity Farm or interested in a class, the course itself, Language of the Soul, you can go and visit martinperkins.com. That's martinperkins.com for the blog, to sign up for the newsletter, to look at the whole breakdown of the curriculum for the course, Language of the Soul, and a whole lot more, including stuff around acupuncture and herbs. Martin, is there anything else you'd like to convey to our listeners today before we wrap up?
Yeah, Ben, there is. I'd like to share that I look upon these kinds of moments in the context of healing and growth as a practice. And that what I saw was a young woman in an extraordinary state of deep practice, of compassion, of kindness, of presence. And in that way, my sincere hope is that for myself and for everyone there, there's a recognition, a sense of, oh, there was a human being practicing being human in this really beautiful way.